Okay, here's the second half of my story about Rocky. Um, if you want to hear the whole backstory of how things came about, then you'll have to listen to part one. Um, it's loading up now as I speak onto YouTube. Basically, what happened was I came into possession of some moose meat in exchange for helping to butcher a moose that was shot by a friend of mine up north. And so I brought home this cardboard box, and it had a moose meat roast in it, and it had a bunch of moose meat steaks, and usually like T-bone type steaks. They were really good, actually. Moose meat is really nice meat. If you never had moose meat before, you don't know what you're missing. It's quite nice. Anyway, brought this box home anyway, and I decided to cook up one of the T-bone steaks for supper. Well, of course, Rocky and Muella, his sister who looked like a cow, were both there. They're from the same litter. Moo was a beautiful white cat with big black spots, so she looked like a Holstein cow, and didn't look at all like Rocky. It's kind of funny. But Rocky was the one gray tabby in the litter. The rest of them looked more like Muella. But anyway, so of course Rocky and Muella were quite excited because they could smell the meat cooking, and you know they were quite excited about it anyway. So of course when I got my steak all cooked up and everything and was ready to sit down and eat, I was cutting pieces off and sharing it with them, and they enjoyed it. And then when the steak was all finished, I threw the T-bone from the steak down on the floor for them. Well, Rocky picked that up in his mouth, and for 2 weeks Rocky carried that around in his mouth. Everywhere he went, you never saw him without that T-bone in his mouth. It was, well, it wasn't a huge T-bone, which is surprising because the moose himself was quite huge, but it was a bone in the shape of a T, and it might have been a couple inches wide, a couple inches by a couple inches. But he'd carry that all over in his mouth, and when he'd go to sleep, he'd put it on the floor, and he'd lay down on top of it to sleep, because I guess he didn't want anybody to steal it. Anyway, that was his prized possession. And he literally carried that around with him everywhere he went. He had it in his mouth for 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, I saw him one day. After 2 weeks, he just dropped the moose. He dropped this moose meat, this moose steak T-bone, on the floor, and he walked away from it. Well, Muella went over and started sniffing around it. He turned around and come back. He picked it up in his mouth again and took off with it, and I never saw it again. To this day, I don't know what he did with it. I don't know where he hid it. When I moved out of that apartment in 2016, I figured I might find it then, wherever it was hidden when I'm clearing the place out. And I never did find it anyway. I have no idea where he hid it. But anyway, that's just a story about Rocky anyway, kind of a cute story. I wish I'd gotten a picture of him with his T-bone steak, with his T-bone from the steak in his mouth, but I never did. Back then, of course, I was still using film cameras. It wasn't on the internet yet, and didn't have a cell phone or anything. And it was getting harder at that time to find film for a camera, and it was getting harder to get film developed, too. And so I wasn't really taking many pictures at that time because it was just too big a pain to do it, really. They were making it impossible, or practically impossible, definitely a lot of trouble anyway, just to be able to get film for my camera and also to be able to get the film developed. So I kind of backed off on taking pictures at that time, so I don't have a picture of him with it. That would have been around 2009, I guess, somewhere in there. But I don't have a picture of him. He's only about a year old. Anyway, that's the story, though. I hope you found it entertaining. whatever I would cook some of the moose meat that I got, Rocky would lay down in front of the stove, and it was funny to see him. It was almost like he was high or something, like he gets when he's using catnip. And every so often he'd get up and he'd go over and he'd sniff around the crack between the door of the stove and the body of the stove. He'd get sniffing around there, and then he'd lay back down again. It was pretty funny anyway. But yeah, quite a cat. Anyway, he definitely loves his moose meat. He hasn't had any in a very long time. Neither of us has, because it's not really that common a thing. Did you ever get moose meat? But anyway, we did have some for a little while there, and it was quite good. And anyway, Rocky and Muella both just loved it. But and Rocky, that T-bone became his prized possession. And I don't know where he hid it. I don't know if he used to go back and visit it sometimes, wherever he hid it, or if he forgot himself about it or what. But anyway, it was well hidden. I'll tell you that. I never did find it, so it was well hidden anyway. All right, we will talk to you later.